Hello, my friends. Hello, and welcome once again to my channel. My name is David, and if you are joining me for the first time, welcome. This is my second in a series of videos. I don't know how many there are going to inevitably be, but the idea behind this is to consider what would make up my ideal bookshelf. And so the idea that I put forth to myself, inspired by Steve Donahue, was if I was filling a bookshelf, top to bottom, and this was the only bookshelf that I could have, what would I want to make sure was on there? And from there, the rest, as they say, is history. And speaking of history, that is what we're going to focus on today. Ancient history, in fact. And so the first one was simply the 10 top essentials, which included, to the surprise of nobody, some Tolkien, included some Shakespeare, Beowulf, Chaucer, among others. And I'll have that down below. Be sure to check that out. It's if you want to know what essentially my top 10 books are, that would give you a good idea. Now, that's not necessarily a fully complete realization of a top 10, but those are the first 10 that came to mind in terms of what I knew I wanted to have and what versions I would want to have. And there are others that even aren't on this one that I would consider to be in the running for that top 10, if not in that top 10, such as The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, which will be coming up in a very soon one. So today I'm doing 10 books that revolve around ancient history, and by and large these are going to be primary sources from ancient history. Because, well, to go and learn about this history, the best place to get it is the first-hand accounts, or the people that were contemporaries of the time or closely to those contemporaries of the time, because any historian today worth their grain of salt is going to be consulting these as they are working on their own histories. So why not just go back to the original source as the first starting point? Now, there are two exceptions on this list to that, and that's where I'm going to begin, is the two exceptions, the ones that are not primary sources. So the first that I'm going to mention is kind of a big overview, and this, from what I can tell, is a pretty highly regarded one. And this is The History of the Ancient World, from the Earliest Accounts to the Fall of Rome by Susan Wise Bauer. Now, what this does is it captures in a little less than 1,000 pages a narrative showing the common threads in the cultures that gave birth to later cultures and everything else. So it is the first volume in a series that she wrote, and it has lots of maps and timelines and all of that, in addition to the narrative being told covering that history. Now, I can't just leave it at that and say this is all I'm considering here, because, as it says, it's the first in a series, and I like me a good series. So there are two other books that are currently out in that history series. Now, they aren't ancient history, but they are both ones that I would pick up as well. The History of the Medieval World, from the conversion of Constantine to the First Crusade, which is going to be my sweet spot right there. And then The History of the Renaissance World, from the rediscovery of Aristotle to the conquest of Constantinople. I think that 3-volume set right there would give a great foundational base of knowledge to refer to as I'm looking at the periods in history that appeal to me the strongest, because that covers what gets me excited. Ancient through Renaissance, that's very much the range of history, and it's a vast range of history. But that is the area in which I love to read literature and the history of. And I would like to have good one-volume works to reference on all three of those. So the one of note for the ancient tie-in is the first one, but I would pick up all three of those in a heartbeat. The second volume that is on this list that does not fall into the realm of being a primary source is SPQR, An History of Ancient Rome by Mary Beard. This came out in 2015, and it is a revisionist history of the Roman Empire from a more modern classicist. And it's one that I know Steve had talked about being a good volume. I've got a buddy read coming up with Very Literary Carrie. We're going to be reading through it at some point in time in the very near future. I'd have to double check. I think we agreed on September, but I failed to go and look forward. But this is one, if I had it, I would hold it up right now. I don't have it yet. I'm hoping to pick up a copy long before we get to that. But worst case, I'm probably able to find this at a library for the purpose of that buddy read, and that would help confirm whether or not it belongs on the permanent shelf or if it is just something that was a fun one to read and then move on from. But I imagine that this is going to be a good one. It's got lots of illustrations. It's got maps. It's a good focal point on Rome. And I lied. I've got a third one. So pairing with that SPQR, I almost forgot about this one being on there. If we're looking at the Roman Empire, there is no more essential piece of literature, piece of work, when considering the Roman Empire that's not by one of the contemporary writers of that time, than The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Edward Gibbon. And this is a 6-volume, massive undertaking. And I've only ever found highly annotated or highly abridged versions of this, and so I've resisted picking up any of those. It's one that I absolutely want to have and read the entire thing of. I know this is a couple hundred years old now. He was not a contemporary back in the Roman Empire, but he is an older scholar, and it's a major work. And even if it's not wholly valid anymore on some of the claims, the statements, the recaps that he has within there, there's going to be enough that's withstood the test of time, and it's still a massive undertaking to where I would want to have that on my shelf and to be able to pull it out. And I would want to have not necessarily a one-volume complete appearance of this. I don't even know if it could fit all in one volume, but I would want to have a complete matching set, such as the Everyman's library set. Now, from what I understand, there's not necessarily one that's any better or worse, just making sure that you get a version that has footnotes in there. And there are two, it sounds like, really well-known folks that provided footnotes. It sounds like the Everyman's Library is going to have those footnotes. But if this is one where I find it in the wild, I would definitely be opening it up and making sure it has footnotes so that I have that commentary in there to provide insight, maybe corrections to what Gibbon has gotten wrong along the way, or elaborations on maybe some things that maybe he didn't go deep enough, far enough on what he was saying. So the next thing I'm going to talk about are these volumes back behind me. I've got 2 of them on my shelf, and these are the landmark books. So I'm cheating here. I'm counting them as one book. They're not one book, but I'm counting them as one book because there was no way I could cut it down with having 6 of these on my list and then only picking 4 more. There was no possible way to make that work. So behind me, you've got the landmark Herodotus, which is his complete histories. You've got the landmark Julius Caesar, which is his 5 major works. I believe they might even be his complete works. But yeah, Gallic War through the Spanish War. Yeah, it is the complete works. Edited by Kurt A. Raaflaub. And so those two are definitely getting read this year, actually. And the other ones I would want to pick up are all of the others. So it looks like the landmark Xenophon's Anabasis is coming out December of this year. So that's something that can be pre-ordered, but it's only in hardcover right now. I'd probably wait a little while to get paperback so that it would match all of the other ones I have and it'd be half the price. But it's on my list right now just because, well, I would want to check it out. I mean, if it happened to fall in my lap and get a copy, I wouldn't be opposed to it. Pairing with that, the landmark Xenophon's Hellenica is out there, which is one of the others. And then the other two that are currently available are the landmark Thucydides, so it is the comprehensive guide to the Peloponnesian War, which would be a good replacement for my Norton Critical Peloponnesian War, which I've gotten through most of. I think the translation might just be a little on the dry side. So I'd be excited to have the landmark edition, not only to try a different translation of it, but to have all of the supplemental materials going along with it. The Norton Critical is great because it'll have the essays and all those other things at the back, but it just doesn't help the text itself to come alive in the way that these landmarks would. And then the last one would be the landmark Arian, which is the campaign of Alexander the Great. And I want to dive more into Alexander the Great, and that would be the place to go to start diving in and get a little deeper on there. So we've got just a couple more to mention here. So next we have Plutarch. This one, if you watch Steve Donahue's recommendations on what to be for your starter kit for ancient history, like almost every biography he mentions the person. This is the person you need to be familiar with. Go get Plutarch's Lives Up, and then that person. Well, I took note. So I would want the complete Plutarch's Lives, and I found a 2-volume version of it in paperback that looks like it'd be good. There wasn't any particular one that stood out in terms of having footnotes or annotations that I could find. So Plutarch's Lives would absolutely be the one that I'd want to put on there. And this particular edition is translated by John Dryden. So it's going to be an older translation, I believe Dryden 1700s. But it would have the quality of translation that a poet could bring to that. And I think that that would be exciting to read that one. Next, we have The 12 Caesars by Pseudonymous. Yes, so learning more about 12 of the greatest Caesars in ancient history would be an essential volume to have. And there's, again, I couldn't really find anything notable, so I've heard that the Penguin edition, the Black Penguin edition, is fantastic, that it'll still have some notes and all of that throughout there, so that would be the version to pick up, much in the way that the Gawain poet, that would be the version to pick up for him. So next we have Marcus Aurelius. So this isn't a biography from him, but it is his Meditations. So this is shifting from more of a historical slant and going more interpersonal from somebody writing in that period of time. And there is an annotated edition of his Meditations, and that would be the volume that I would want to pick up, because I love an annotated work, and having the annotations to go along with the Marcus Aurelius Meditations would be a very enlightening read to go through. So we've got 3 more that we're going to count down. And so pairing with Marcus Aurelius, and speaking of other writers who were not writing about history per se, but passing along their knowledge, we must have Plato and Aristotle, 2 great philosophical thinkers of that time. Whether or not their thoughts, their beliefs align with anything that I still hold true today, doesn't matter. Being able to read their works, to grapple with the arguments and posturing and proposing that they put forth, and to just come to terms with what they put down and seeing how it still holds true today. There's nothing of greater value than diving into both of those. And so there is a Plato Complete Works, which is, from what I could tell, the highly regarded version to use for students and for scholars, because it's got notes, it's got all kinds of stuff in there. It is typically used as a textbook, so there's bound to be good used copies out on the market. And again, like all of the rest of my essential editions, I'll have a link to an Amazon wish list that has all of these that I don't currently have on there. And then I will have I'm going to set up a Goodreads shelf, I believe, with all of these so that you can see the entire list, and not just the ones that I do not own. So for Aristotle, it becomes a little more challenging because there's a lot by Aristotle. There's not a single volume that really jumps out, and I still want to do more research into this, but there's a nice 2-volume set that have the complete works of Aristotle. Now, whether or not you need the complete works, I don't know. I would want to read his complete works, and so that's why I'm starting with this 2-volume set. And this is something that can be shaped over time. Right now, it's a placeholder because I want there to be Aristotle on here. If I find that there's a segment of his works that are the truly essential ones, and there's an edition that has good notes and scholarly annotations or maps or anything of those sort, for studying purposes, finding out what maybe students would be studying for Aristotle, though that might get subbed in for this complete works 2-volume set. But right now, that is the one that goes in there. And then last but not least, we have Tacitus. So this is another great historian. I wanted to conclude with him because he was the last one that made the cut. I had about 6 different names of other ancient historians of the time, and as I was looking through them, this was the one that rose to the top of the surface. And so the complete works of Tacitus, modern library, hardcover edition, there's no newer versions that I could find that had his complete works, but I would want to have the annals, the history, the Agricola, Germany, and then dialogue on oratory being his complete works. And from what I understand, he's kind of a controversial historian, so it would be interesting to have a more somebody that's a little unique and a little more controversial to be reading from and seeing what he had to say on some of these events that were happening during his time. So there's my 10 plus, because I can't keep it at just 10, even though I'm setting out to do just 10. I'll still find ways to sneak in extras as we go along. So for those of you that aren't interested at all in historical works, don't worry. The next video is going to be more catered to your desire. I'm going to choose classics as my next 10 that I'm going to be looking at. So you're going to see, spoiler alert, a Count of Monte Cristo on there. I won't spoil any of the other 9 that will be on there, but they won't be repeats of anything. So Sherlock Holmes would definitely make that list, but he was already in my original top 10. So yeah, I'm going to do classics next, and then I'm going to circle back around and do medieval historians and history. And then I'm going to do science fiction and fantasy. And in that one, it won't be 10 books, it will be 10 series, most likely, rather than 10 individual books. Because otherwise, if I was going to put something like the Wheel of Time on there, how would I fit it? Do I do 10 in the one video and then make a second video with the other 4? Do I include the prequel? Wheel of Time isn't going to make that 10. Sorry, Wheel of Time fans. I've read them all. I've enjoyed it. It's not an essential thing for my collection. Not just because of the size. But yeah, I'll do science fiction and fantasy after that. So I've got my next couple of video ideas in mind. Eventually, I'll circle back to ancients again and look at works of literature. So you might have noticed the omissions of things like the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid. Those I intentionally pushed off to do a separate 10 where I would consider those types of works. And I'll do the same with medieval literature and works, not counting Beowulf and Le Morte d'Arthur, which were already in a previous video. So yeah, that's my 10 here on the ancients. I hope you enjoy this idea. I would love to see other booktubers do something similar. You know, even if it's just in pure speculation, figuring out what are the books that I would absolutely want to have, and you know, count down 10 of them at a time, or however many you want to do, and share with the world what it is that you would prioritize getting for that bookshelf. You don't even have to have them. I mean, for goodness sakes, I've got 2, and in my previous video, I think I had only 2 or 3 of those essential editions as well. There's a lot but it's going to help me prioritize. If somebody, you know, gives me a $50 Amazon gift card, then I have a wish list to where I can go and look and say, okay, what can I pick up that is on my essential bookshelf, rather than going and, you know, scattershotting and picking up something that is on a whim. I'm prioritizing things that I know I want to have and I want to read. And these are works that I would want to be able to have in my library to where I can refer back to them time and time again as I go through it all. So feel free to leave a comment. Let me know if any of these interest you at all. If there's any of them that you've read and enjoyed, if there's any that you want to read, because at some point in time I'll have them and would gladly buddy read any of these with folks. And let me know if you do end up doing an ideal bookshelf video or anything of that sort, and I'd love to watch it and see what your thoughts are on your behalf. So my name is David again. Thank you for watching, and have a great rest of your day.